Have you ever taken one of those tests to get a job? Yeah, it feels pretty simple, right? You get a good score, you move on. But what's really happening behind the scenes? Well, it turns out there's this whole complex web of trade-offs, things that are totally invisible to pretty much everyone involved. Today, we're going to pull back that curtain and see how these tests really shape who gets hired and, just as importantly, who gets left behind. So here's the plan. First, we'll talk about the hiring tightrope every company has to walk. Then, we'll quickly break down 4 key concepts you absolutely need to know. After that, we'll uncover a brand new source of error in hiring, see its hidden consequences in action, and finally, we'll look at how we can actually make these crucial trade-offs visible. All right, so just imagine this. Every single organization out there, I don't care if it's a tiny startup or a massive corporation, is walking this incredibly thin tightrope. And they're trying to do 2 really important and sometimes totally opposite things at the very same time. And it all boils down to this one question. How do we hire the absolute best people for the job and do it fairly? I mean, think about it. Companies want the rock stars, the top performers, to boost their bottom line. But they also have this huge legal and ethical responsibility to be fair and to build a diverse team. How in the world do you do both? Well, according to the research we're diving into today, this balancing act really involves 4 big pressures that are constantly pushing and pulling against each other: test validity, test bias, selection errors, and adverse impact. Okay, so to really get our heads around this, we need to be speaking the same language. So let's just take a minute and quickly define what these 4 key concepts actually mean. First up, test validity. This is the most basic question of all. Does this test actually work? Does it predict who will be a great employee? You know, if the people who get high scores turn out to be your superstars, then yeah, the test has high validity. It's all about its predictive power. Next is test bias. Now listen closely, because this is a really important distinction. This is not about one group having a higher average score than another. A test is considered biased, statistically speaking, if the very same score predicts different levels of job performance for different groups of people. It basically means the test is a faulty crystal ball. It gives you a different and wrong prediction depending on who you're looking at. So think of it this way. With an unbiased test, everyone's on the same line. A score of 85 points to the same level of performance, no matter who you are. Simple. But with a biased test, suddenly there are different prediction lines. That same 85 might predict great performance for one group, but only so-so performance for another. The test is systematically getting it wrong. Third, we've got selection errors. Look, no hiring system is ever going to be perfect. A false positive is when you hire someone who just doesn't work out. But a false negative, that one's almost more tragic. That's when you reject someone who would have been an absolute superstar. They're the ones who got away. And finally, adverse impact. Now, this one is a really big deal, legally speaking. This is what happens when any part of your hiring process, like a test, ends up weeding out a much larger percentage of people from one particular group. It's not about whether you meant to do it. It's all about the final numbers. Okay, so we've got our 4 concepts. Researchers have been studying these for decades, but usually they've looked at them one by one. The real breakthrough here was seeing how they all connect, and in doing so, they found a completely new type of hiring mistake. And that leads us to a really important question. The tools we have for spotting test bias, well, they're not perfect. So what happens when a company is using a test that they genuinely believe is fair, but in reality, it's secretly biased? This is what the researchers called bias-based selection errors. And these aren't your typical hiring goofs. No, this is a whole hidden category of mistakes that is created specifically because you're using a biased tool as if it were fair. It's an error that's born from a completely faulty assumption. You can almost picture it, right? These errors pop up in the gap between what you think is happening and what's actually happening. A company assumes one single prediction line works for everybody. But in reality, there are these separate hidden lines for different groups. That space between assumption and reality, that's where these invisible errors are born. Okay, I know this might sound a little theoretical, so let's make it super concrete. The researchers built a model to actually put some numbers to these effects, and honestly, the results are pretty shocking. We're going to walk through 2 scenarios based on their work right now. First, let's take what seems like the perfect situation, a test that is statistically totally unbiased. It predicts performance equally well for everyone involved. Sounds great, right? What could possibly go wrong? Well, watch what happens. So the company sets a really high bar for performance. But even with a perfectly fair test, because the groups have different average scores to begin with, you get this result. The selection rate for the majority group is almost 39%, while for the minority group, it's less than 16%. That creates huge adverse impact. And here is the brutal trade-off, laid bare. To fix that adverse impact and meet the legal fairness rule, the company has to lower its standards a lot, dropping its desired performance level from a 3.25 all the way down to a 2.45 on a 5-point scale. The choice is really stark. Go for top performance and create inequality, or go for equality and accept lower performance. That is the hiring tightrope. But now, let's get to the really wild scenario. Let's say a company is using a test they think is fair, but it secretly isn't. They use the same passing score for everyone, thinking they're doing the right thing. The consequences? Well, they're disastrous. Because the test actually overpredicts how well people in the minority group will do, a staggering 22% of the people hired from that group are bias-based false positives. They pass the test, but they're not actually expected to meet the performance standard. The system is setting them up to fail from day one. But it's not just unfair in one direction. The test underpredicts performance for the majority group. That means 5.5% of perfectly qualified applicants are getting unfairly rejected. And this is the key point. An unknown bias hurts everyone. It hires people who are likely to struggle and rejects people who would have been great. The whole system just breaks down. So, what on earth do we do about this? Well, the real power of this research isn't that it gives us a magic wand to solve the problem. It's that it gives us a tool to finally see the problem clearly before we even make a single hiring decision. So let's wrap up with the big takeaways here. First, hiring is just a system of trade-offs. It's always a push and pull between performance and fairness. Second, those hidden bias-based errors are very real and they can cause serious harm. But here's the most powerful idea. This framework lets organizations model these trade-offs beforehand. You can see the likely outcomes before a single applicant ever takes your test. And that changes hiring from a guessing game into a deliberate choice, one based on both data and your company's values. And the authors themselves say it perfectly. This is all about combining the hard data with important value-based decisions. The math doesn't give you the right answer, but it forces you to ask the right and often really difficult questions about what you truly care about. And that really leaves all of us with a big question to chew on. We now have tools that can actually predict and put numbers to the hidden consequences and the potential unfairness of our hiring systems. They make the invisible visible. So the final question isn't just for researchers or HR people. It's for all of us. If we have a tool that can predict unfairness, what is our responsibility to actually use it?